Hello, everybody, and welcome back to PT on Ice, Jerry PT edition. My name is Christina Previtt, and I am on the older adult faculty with my partner in crime, Dustin Jones. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. If you're up here in Canada or in the northern US, snow has started to come through the ground, which to me means that Christmas decorations are allowed to go up. We're past Remembrance Day, Veterans Day, and that tends to be that marker. So over the last couple of weeks, Dustin and I have been getting ready for our first live course, the Modern Management of the Older Adult with Beth Templin in St. Louis. We're super excited. But one of the things that I've been doing is a lot of speaking around geriatric PT. And the cool thing, I was speaking at the Canadian Physiotherapy Association Congress, and then I was speaking to the University of Manitoba faculty. And the interest in geriatric PT, I think, is really starting to grow. We know that we have a population that's aging, and we have more people over the age of 65 than under 18. And this demographic and this trend is going to continue, especially into 2030 and above. But I see that the paradigm is starting to shift, where we're not accepting that after a certain age, we are not allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And so the question starts to come up about what actually is normal aging and what are some of the things that we can expect to lose and is a normal physiological process. And then my challenge is what is also just a consequence of deconditioning. And so what is happening at a more accelerated rate? Because what we know is that we're gonna lose certain abilities as we get older. That's just a natural consequence. But what we also know is that people are less active as they get older. And so what can we attribute to the aging process? And what can we attribute to deconditioning? And that's why I've talked a lot about the master's athlete, because these are individuals who are continuing to train at a moderate to high level. And what we're seeing is that they're maintaining a lot of these physiological changes that had been traditionally thought to just disappear as we got older, and they're maintaining it with a training effect. So when it comes to the physiology of aging, we know that aging is a reserve issue. So what that means is, when we're younger, we have a lot of redundancy in our system, whether that is our ability to recover. You know, when we were 15, 16, we would get hurt, we would bounce right back. That doesn't necessarily stay with us into our 40s, 50s, and beyond. And that is true for a bunch of our organ systems. So when we look at the biological theories of aging, one of them is that as we get older and cells continue to reproduce, the telomere tail at the end of the cell DNA is getting shorter and shorter. So we're losing that reserve, which means that that signal to apoptose or senesce is happening earlier. So we're having an increase in the level of apoptosis, and the regeneration of cells is happening at the same rate or at a slightly decreased rate. So we're seeing a decrease in reserve until we hit a critical threshold. The same is happening at the level of the organ. We have a certain amount of redundancy. As we get older, we use up that amount of reserve that we have. A perfect example is with type 2 diabetes, when our pancreas and our insulin secretion is not up to maintaining the adequate blood sugar levels in our bloodstream. And we hit this critical threshold, eventually we get diagnosed with diabetes. We know that this is also true with clinical geriatric syndromes, which are constellations of signs and symptoms, which is, again, essentially a reserve issue. In PT, we deal with this all the time. How many times do things start to break down as a result of overuse? Because our bodies aren't strong enough to handle what we're asking them to do. And as we get older, if we're continuing at a level that they'd been at for 20 to 30 years, but we're seeing either a slight deconditioning effect or some changes in physiological function as a result of aging, we're gonna hit that critical threshold a little bit easier. We're gonna continue to dip under it faster, and it's gonna take longer for us to get up. So that's why we're not recovering the same, and we're starting to see that some of our older clients are having these issues happen in more of a cyclical pattern than we would see in some of our younger clients. Not to mention some of the chronic degenerative stuff like arthritis, which is kind of compounding to that. And so what we're starting to see with the Masters athlete is that we're looking at endurance and strength level athletes, and we are trying to see, what is allowing them to maintain their certain level. What are the records, and when are these records starting to increase in the time to completion? Because we can make the argument that those slopes, so that increase in time to completion for endurance events, for example, whether it be swimming, running, triathlon, when they start to increase with age, one, that's when people are usually characterized as a Masters level athlete, because that is a physiological change that we cannot train away. And then we're starting to look at these individuals and study these individuals and see what's going on. So a perfect example is one of the biggest things that we see. You're gonna hear my dog in the background running around. One of the biggest things that we see is that the argument that we make for power and strength training is that there's a preferential loss of type 2 fibers in our muscle composition, those fast twitch reactive fibers. And they're important because it allows us to react quickly. It allows us to generate power into the ground, which has implications for gait speed and reactive balance potentially in a falls prevention paradigm. But we assume that this is a natural consequence of age. But when we start to look at Masters level endurance runners who are continuing to train power and train like high intensity interval training, these sprint mechanics, things like that, we're starting to see that individuals are maintaining these fibers. We're still gonna see some loss. So as we're doing resistance training paradigms in our older groups, we're not necessarily seeing that individuals are getting these huge bulky muscles. Some of my older clients who are in their 50s are like, I don't wanna look big and jacked. And the capacity for us to have hypertrophy as we get older goes down. But what we're starting to see is that there's a neurological efficiency effect as we continue to train into older age. So what we mean by that is we may not have an increase in the number of motor units, but we're seeing an increase in collateral sprouting that's allowing individuals to continue to train with a high level of efficiency and get that fast twitch motor contraction as a result of training. But if we aren't using those power systems, as we get into our 40s, 50s, and 60s, we don't run as much, we don't sprint as much. The opportunities that we're doing with high intensity interval training up until the last 5 or 10 years was probably relatively low. And so we were never training that system. So it's kind of a use it or lose it principle. And so we're seeing that the amount that we're able to maintain is actually much higher than we thought as people are getting older. And I compare this often to somebody who's a vegetarian. We know that the enzymes in our gut react to the food that we take in and that the body needs to break down. And so if people are going extended periods of time without eating meat, then the enzymes that we use to break down those animal proteins are expensive and we start to get rid of them. The same is true when we are working out. If we're not using those type 2 fibers, then we're no longer going to use them. From an aerobic perspective, from the cardiovascular system perspective, we're starting to see that there is going to be a decrease in max heart rate, which translates into a decrease in stroke volume. So that's going to have a decrease in max heart rate. So we're going to see a decrease in the ability to hit those high thresholds, and we potentially have to go at a lower intensity as we get older. But what we're starting to see is that lactate threshold and exercise capacity is relatively the same. So if we can still maintain a certain level of training, we are gonna see those decreases in max heart rate, which is gonna correspond to an increased time to completion for endurance level events. But we're able to maintain much more. So when we're taking Masters athletes who are in their 70s and comparing them to elite level younger athletes, sedentary older adults, and non-active younger athletes, we're seeing that these individuals in their 70s who are continuing to compete in endurance level events are comparable in terms of their cardiac parameters, their blood work, and some of their outputs to a non-active sedentary younger person, which is incredible when we think about these comparisons. And so right now, with the baby boomers starting to get older, where I'm starting to see more people. I work in outpatient orthopedics. I have a gym where we have a lot of individuals who are 50 plus. We have a program that is specifically tailored to individuals 50 plus that I run and manage, that are trying to challenge that paradigm. I have people in their 70s who want to continue to run. I have 80-year-old bowlers who are able to be active. I have a 60-year-old who wants to be able to lift up her grandchild and so needs a prerequisite level of strength in order to be able to do that. And so I've had individuals, unfortunately, come to me who have been told by other clinicians that this is as good as it's gonna get. We're gonna just try and maintain. You're gonna be in pain because of arthritis, which is a whole other discussion that we can have. But they also say that, you know, as you get older, you're not gonna have the same strength and energy and da-da-da-da. And as much as some of that is true, we do know that at all ages, we're able to train, and therefore that we're able to see change. And so I hope that this message comes across and that it can translate not only into people who are community dwelling and trying to convince people to still participate in sport, even though that is great, and for some people that might be what they want to do, but just seeing the potential of our older clients to increase that level of reserve, especially if we catch them early enough. Sometimes it's hard when we're in acute care or in hospital settings when we're so close to that critical threshold to increase that reserve. What we know is when people are getting closer and closer to that critical threshold, that deconditioning effect has taken hold for probably many, many years. And so the amount of time it takes in order for us to reach a level of physical function that is going to be translating into changes in quality of life. Sorry, my dog is triggerly crying. She wants to go outside. And the amount of time it's gonna take is much, much higher. And so for some people, optimal parameters is trying to get on an exercise program for 6 months to a year. And so there are sometimes systems level barriers that can prevent us from getting there. But what we know is that the potential is there. All right, that is my PT on Ice for today. I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful Wednesday. If you guys have any questions or comments, please tag me. Sometimes it doesn't get tagged and I see it a lot later. So tag me in the comments. I hope that if you guys are around the St. Louis area, you consider coming to our Modern Management of the Older Adult course. We also have our next cohort of the online version of MMOA starting in January. So if you aren't around St. Louis but still want to jump on with the Jerry PT bandwagon, I hope you do so and sign up soon. Bye guys.